And how do I know there's a merciful God? Because I've seen the devil plenty of times.
At 65, Burt Lancaster lost the role of a lifetime. Whispers about his private life had reached the wrong ears, and the studio pulled away in fear. For a man who had built his career on strength, charisma, and daring, the rejection cut deeply. Audiences never saw the turmoil behind his blazing smile, but the cost of keeping secrets was enormous. One rumor could end everything. In Hollywood, where image ruled over truth, the wrong story could be deadlier than failure. This was the moment Lancaster realized how fragile success could be. To understand how he reached that precipice, we must return to where it all began, in the streets of New York during the Great Depression. Burt Lancaster was born Burton Stephen Lancaster in 1913 in East Harlem, New York. His parents were working class, his father a postal worker and his mother a homemaker. They raised 5 children in a cramped apartment where money was scarce but discipline was firm. Burt grew up during the Roaring '20s, when jazz spilled from clubs, flappers danced with abandon, and silent film stars lit up screens. Yet by the time he reached adolescence, the Great Depression had cast its long shadow. Bread lines stretched down city blocks, and young men like Burt searched for ways to survive. He was a tall, athletic boy, drawn to the excitement of the streets more than the classrooms. Baseball games on city lots and long afternoons in neighborhood gyms built his strength, but he was also restless, searching for adventure beyond the crowded tenements. He found it in the circus. Alongside his childhood friend Nick Cravat, Burt joined a traveling troupe as an acrobat. Swinging high above the crowd on trapeze bars, he felt free for the first time. The applause roared louder than the hunger that often gnawed at him. In the 1,930 seconds, America carried both glamour and repression. The jazz age had ended, but swing music and dance halls still pulsed with energy. Men wore sharp suits and slicked hair. Women favored long gowns and elegance that defied economic hardship. Yet morality was strictly policed. Homosexuality was criminalized, whispered about but never spoken aloud. Young men like Burt learned early that survival meant presenting strength and certainty, never weakness or vulnerability. The circus became more than a job. It taught Burt discipline, courage, and the power of performance. Every leap and fall shaped the poise he would later bring to the screen. He also learned the intimacy of backstage life, where bonds were formed in secret and loyalty mattered more than words. But by the late 1,930 seconds, injuries forced him to step away. His powerful body, trained for the trapeze, had begun to break under the strain. With his circus days ending, he searched for a new path. As war loomed, Lancaster found himself drawn toward service, then toward acting. The transition was uncertain, but the pull of performance remained. From Harlem to the circus tent, he had been preparing for Hollywood without knowing it. What began as survival would soon turn into stardom. When World War II erupted, Burt Lancaster enlisted in the army, serving in the entertainment division. He performed for troops, not in combat but on stage, keeping spirits alive. That taste of performance lingered after the war, and when he returned to New York, a chance encounter changed everything. While visiting a friend, a theatrical producer noticed his striking presence. Soon, Lancaster was cast in a Broadway play, though he had little acting experience. What he lacked in training, he made up for with raw intensity. Hollywood came calling in 1946. His debut in The Killers was electric. As the doomed Swede, Lancaster combined athletic strength with haunting vulnerability. Audiences were captivated. Critics declared a new star had arrived. The studio quickly molded his image as the rugged outsider, the man of action who still carried emotional weight. He was not just handsome, he was compelling. Through the late 1,940 seconds and into the 1,950 seconds, Lancaster built a career that balanced physicality and artistry. He starred in films like Brute Force, Crisscross, and Sorry, Wrong Number. Each role revealed a man who could embody both danger and tenderness. Unlike many actors of his generation, he refused to settle into typecasting. He sought control of his work, co-founding a production company with Harold Hecht, and later James Hill. This move gave him rare independence in an era dominated by the studio system. Their company produced a string of acclaimed films. From Here to Eternity brought Lancaster one of his most famous roles as the tough sergeant who found forbidden love on a Hawaiian beach. The image of him kissing Deborah Kerr in the surf became iconic, though the passion on screen only hinted at the complexity of his private life. Elmer Gantry won him an Academy Award in 1960, cementing his reputation as a fearless actor willing to tackle controversial roles. Fans adored him. His towering frame, piercing blue eyes, and athletic grace made him a matinee idol. But behind the fame, Lancaster carried the weight of a secret. The higher he rose, the greater the pressure to maintain a flawless image. Hollywood demanded masculinity, control, and moral certainty. Any rumor of scandal could topple a career built on strength. The studio publicity machine promoted his marriages and friendships, but the truth was more complicated. The star who embodied rugged independence was learning the cost of living two lives. Behind closed doors, Burt Lancaster's life told a different story than the one splashed across fan magazines. Friends and biographers have long noted that his personal life was complex, layered with relationships that did not fit the studio's carefully crafted narrative. Hollywood in the 1,940 seconds and 1,950 seconds was a place of coded signals, discrete parties, and whispered networks where same-sex relationships were both possible and perilous. It was in this hidden world that Lancaster reportedly found companionship. Fellow actors, stage performers, and even men from outside the industry crossed his path. At industry gatherings, where the music swelled and champagne glasses clinked, glances across the room carried meaning. A hand resting too long on a shoulder, a quick exit through a side door. These were the ways intimacy began, in a world where discovery meant ruin. Some accounts suggest Lancaster shared a particularly close bond with men like Rock Hudson and Anthony Perkins. Whether those relationships were fleeting encounters or deeper connections remains uncertain, but they reflected the pressures of their time. Each man knew the danger of exposure. Studio contracts included morality clauses. Tabloids hunted for scandal. Careers could vanish overnight if secrets reached the wrong desk. For Lancaster, secrecy became survival. He traveled with trusted friends who acted as buffers. On film sets abroad, particularly in Europe where social attitudes were more permissive, he found moments of freedom. A hotel room in Rome, a villa on the French coast, or a quiet dinner in Madrid offered spaces where he could relax without fear. These escapes gave him temporary relief from Hollywood's watchful eyes. Yet even these moments carried risk. An indiscreet comment from a jealous rival, a curious journalist following a hunch, could ignite suspicion. The knowledge of living under constant threat carved deep grooves of anxiety. Lancaster was known for his discipline, his rigid control over his public image, but that control came at a cost. He could never fully trust. Still, within this shadowed existence, there was genuine tenderness. Relationships built on secrecy often burned with intensity. Clandestine letters, unrecorded travels, and private promises formed a hidden world parallel to the one fans believed they knew. For Lancaster, love was real, but it was also dangerous. And as the years passed, the danger grew. Hollywood was changing, the press more aggressive, the public more curious. Rumors no longer stayed. Whispers. They began to creep into headlines. And soon, those whispers would threaten everything Lancaster had built. By the mid-1960 seconds, Hollywood's moral guardrails began to loosen, but not fast enough for Burt Lancaster. The gossip columns, once restrained by studio power, were now hungry for scandal. Confidential magazine had already ruined lives with its stories of hidden romances, and whispers about Lancaster began to surface. According to those close to him, a major role slipped away when rumors reached the producer's ears. Lancaster, then in his mid-60s, was devastated. It was not the first time studios had heard gossip, but the climate was shifting. No longer could image alone protect him. The press sensed the story behind the smile, and executives preferred to avoid risk. Losing a role was more than a professional setback. It was a reminder that everything he had achieved could be undone in an instant. The personal toll was heavy. Lancaster grew more guarded, careful even with close friends. Parties became minefields. A glance too long, a laugh too intimate, could be misread. In private, he wrestled with loneliness. Fame had given him wealth, acclaim, and artistic freedom. Yet it also built walls around his heart. He fought back through his work. Lancaster leaned into roles that explored moral ambiguity. In films like The Swimmer, he portrayed men wrestling with disillusionment, a mirror of his own struggles. His performances carried raw power, shaped by the pressures he could not voice. Critics praised his intensity, but few recognized the personal battles fueling it. The era's laws added another layer of fear. Police raids on bars, arrests for indecency, and morality hearings in the press reminded him that even a hint of exposure could be catastrophic. For a man known for strength, the burden of silence was crushing. By the end of the decade, Lancaster faced a crossroads. The gossip had cost him opportunities. His personal life remained shrouded in secrecy, and Hollywood itself was transforming. Younger stars were emerging, the old studio system fading. The world that once built him was no longer the same. At this low point, Lancaster realized survival meant reinvention. If he could no longer outrun the whispers, he would outlast them by shifting his craft and redefining his legacy. The crisis had scarred him, but it also gave him clarity. The 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds brought both challenges and unexpected triumphs for Burt Lancaster. As the studio era collapsed, he found new ground in European cinema, where directors valued his intensity over his image. Films like The Leopard and Conversation Piece showed him as a mature performer, unafraid of vulnerability. In these roles, Lancaster discovered freedom, away from Hollywood's relentless scrutiny. Then came Atlantic City in 1980. As Lou, the weary small-time gangster longing for relevance, Lancaster delivered one of his greatest performances. Critics hailed it as a career renaissance. The role earned him an Academy Award nomination and reminded audiences of his enduring power. Behind the acclaim, however, Lancaster was quietly reflecting on the cost of his double life. Friends recall him becoming more candid in later years. While he never publicly labeled himself, his comments grew more open. He spoke of loneliness, of Hollywood's cruelty, of how fame demanded silence. In an era when younger generations were beginning to come out more freely, Lancaster remained cautious, but he admired their courage. His health began to falter in the late 1,980 seconds. A stroke weakened his body, forcing retirement. Yet even then, he retained his dignity, welcoming friends and family into his home, including those who had shared his private world for decades. In his final years, Lancaster valued connection above image. The walls he had once built began to soften. As society slowly shifted, he became a quiet observer of change. Movements for LGBTQ rights, more open conversations in film and culture, and the fall of the old taboos made him reflect on what might have been. He had lived through decades where authenticity was punished, and though he never fully escaped secrecy, he found peace in knowing the world was moving forward. The man who once symbolized rugged masculinity ended his journey with humility and grace. He had been a star, a fighter, a survivor, but also a man who longed for acceptance. In those final reflections lay his truest legacy, not only as an actor of brilliance, but as a human being who bore the weight of silence and still endured. Burt Lancaster's story is one of brilliance shadowed by secrecy. He soared from the streets of East Harlem to global stardom, captivating audiences with strength, passion, and daring roles. Yet behind the screen, he carried the burden of a hidden truth. In a world that demanded perfection, even whispers of difference could destroy a career. He paid for that silence with lost opportunities and private loneliness. But Lancaster also left behind a legacy of resilience. His performances remain etched into film history, filled with the power of a man who knew struggle and triumph in equal measure. His choices, both public and private, remind us of the cost of living in an age when authenticity was forbidden. His story challenges us to remember the humanity behind the star, the price of silence, and the courage it takes to endure. What do you think Lancaster's life tells us about Hollywood's hidden history? Share your thoughts in the comments. and subscribe for more untold stories of the stars.